Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Best Life podcast. I'm really excited about who I was able to bring on this month. Our topic is work-life balance, and oddly enough, it took a lot of scheduling to actually get here. We were originally trying to do it in front of some super cool backdrop. Here in Arizona, there's a place called, Hole in the Rock?
Hole in the Rock in Papago Park.
Yep, so we wanted to do it like at sunset, but all of us work completely different jobs with completely different schedules, and we're currently recording this Saturday night at 9:30 p.m. So this is what we got. But I'm gonna go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
My name is Eladio Albornoz. I met Scarlett long ago from dancing. I just finished and got my bachelor's in medical studies. My plan is to apply to medical school, and I am currently a Spanish medical interpreter and translator at the county hospital.
Hi everyone, my name is Paola Perdomo. I am originally from Venezuela. I just actually got my master's of architecture here at the Arizona State. I originally got my bachelor's from the University of Florida, and I currently work at a design firm in the Scottsdale area.
Okay, so I did mention that our topic is work-life balance this month. So let's just start off with, what are your definitions of work-life balance? Like, how would you just define it in a way that everybody could understand?
I would say that in simple words is balancing your time within your work, what you do for a living, what you actually do to put food on the table, to afford where you live, and also balancing playtime, what playtime, like leisure time, having fun, spending time with family, things that help with your health, like working out, going hiking, going to the park, those little things, and just balancing the two, because oftentimes we get drawn to just working, or we get drawn to just, doing that playtime, and we can't afford some things sometimes. So long story short, just balancing those two. And
the only thing I would add to that is just thinking about how you live life sustainably. And I mean that in the sense of like what Eladio, alluded to, like doing enough to support your means and your lifestyle, while also, giving time to recuperate, do social things, and kind of feed that other parts of yourself that aren't financially needed.
I like that. I think I would define it as just having a high quality life. Because in order to have that high quality, you do need all of those things. And before we started recording, we talked a little bit about what different categories kind of come into play. And we came up with health, including both physical and mental, having hobbies and pastimes, having space and time for recovery, being engaged in education, and then having a social circle. So I think I would define it more just like simply having a high quality life, because it looks different for everyone, right? Like what works for me is not necessarily going to work for Eladio, and it's not necessarily going to work for Paola. But as long as we each can figure out what that looks like for us, and I think that's going to maximize our quality of life, maximize our happiness, minimize stress, like give us better sleep. So I think that's how I would define work-life balance, because it brings everything into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about these different categories though, like health, hobbies, recovery, education, and social circles. What would you say for you guys is, like, out of all of those, what are your maybe 2 or 3 priorities? And maybe we can see how that like differs from like person to person.
yeah, for sure. I feel like obviously they all interconnect. They're all related. We always prioritize health, because without health you can't really do much. You can really work and just do the things you want to do for your hobbies and such. But oftentimes we don't prioritize it. Sometimes you're like, oh, you know what, I'm just gonna like skip sleep, or I'm gonna do this so I can spend some more time with my friends, or spend some more time going out dancing, or I'm going to do some overtime work just to get an extra paycheck and all that. And this is sleep that you're not going to get back. And at some point, it haunts you back, and it's not good. I'm sure we have gone through it. Like, sleep deprivation sucks. So I guess little things like managing your schedule correctly, setting a boundary, like, okay, at this time I'm gonna go home. I need my quality sleep. I'm not gonna mindless scroll before bed. That way I can actually fall back asleep. I'm gonna take the measures possible, like taking melatonin or any other supplement or any like meditation, any habit, any little tip and trick that helps you fall asleep better. So you can just do better for the next day.
So here's a question, because it sounds like you prioritize your health. Out of those categories, how have you seen prioritizing your health benefit your work life?
When you see people in the morning and they haven't had their coffee, I honestly, like, it's true. I mean, it is a mood changer. Caffeine is a stimulant. Like, it will change the way you act, the way you do things, and enhance it. I love coffee. I love caffeine, which is something that you also gotta watch out for, because if you have too much, you can also cannot also fall asleep at night. But if you simply get enough sleep, sometimes you don't even need caffeine. Obviously, this is different for everybody. In my case, taking caffeine a little bit later in the day helps. But just like having your good 8-hour deep sleep or a little bit longer, as much as you need, it's such a game changer. Work is easier. Work is faster. Work is more fun if
you don't feel like you're dying.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just make things easier for sure.
Like that.
Yeah.
What about you, Paola? What do you, out of these categories, health, hobbies, recovery, social circles, what do you prioritize?
So I find myself in a really interesting position, because I would say for the most part, up until very recently, the one that I, besides work, obviously, the other kind of sphere that I really tried to feed was my social life. And I think it's mostly because, social interactions like really do take up like a good portion of our mental health. We saw how isolation, can feed many, many other like mental diseases, if you want to call it that. And so I think I've always really valued kind of like feeding that social, kind of counteracting my work life with my social life. And to be quite honest, health for me, like you were saying before, like especially at this age, we really do take it for granted. And we really take for granted how, quickly our bodies bounce back.
I think something that came to mind when you were talking about how our bodies bounce back is when I was a kid, I was never really taught to like really take a look at how my body was reacting to things, whether that was lack of sleep, certain foods, like stress. And it wasn't until recently that I was like, okay, like if I slow down and I'm not caught up in work, caught up in stress, caught up in being busy all the time, I can actually see like, hey, certain things help me feel better. And if I do those things, then I'll perform better, whether that was like in school or at work or even in social settings. Like if I am well rested, I'm a lot more likely to engage with my friends than if I'm like falling asleep on the couch. So I like that you mentioned that, because we do take for granted how our bodies are young right now. But I think that a part of that is because we've never been taught to slow down. And dare I say, part of that reason we've never been taught is because of the definition of work-life balance in the United States. So let's hop over to that for a second. All of us here have lived in different parts of the world and of the United States. So kind of just sharing a little bit of other places you've lived in versus Arizona. How have you seen work-life balance be defined differently, and maybe even how the differences have affected you?
So that's a very interesting question for me. I think the context that I can provide is really kind of, the corporate view. And I would say, having worked in Panama and then Florida when I lived there, and then now Arizona, I will also caveat by saying that there were also different phases of my life. And so I think right now what I can speak to is the similarities that kind of existed. And I think this just kind of comes to show what both the phase that you were in your life, but how corporate mentality really has, at least in my career, the feel like how it manifests in my career has kind of like come to play. I think when I was working in Panama, I definitely had a little bit more of a work-life balance, in the sense of like I was living with my mom. Transportation was a little bit hard, so I really had to manage my time in that, like, I knew that I depended on other people for rides. So I knew that I needed to get my work done after a certain time period. When I was, living in Tampa, I was living with like family friends. And so I had my own means of transportation, but at the same time, I felt like that provided a little bit more kind of authority as to like how I spent my free time. But at the same time, I think what I would say is all of those periods were also heavily influenced by the phase I was in. And more specifically, the transition, after graduating at that point from my bachelor's and really starting to work. And I think that transition is hard because while you're in school, like, I think work-life balance is more obvious because busyness comes in waves. You have like really busy periods, and then you have really kind of more stable periods. And so kind of that give and take that we were talking about is a little bit more obvious once you kind of step into the realm of, well, what we'll call corporate America, whether, you're here in Panama or whatever. It was really difficult to transition because the busyness never ended.
Thinking back, my experience back in Venezuela, I'm also from Venezuela. Did not mention that, but I moved here when I was 14. I was not working. I was a high school student then, and then I moved here, became a high school student here. But from what I saw is that at the time, it definitely changed now because of political reasons and such, but it was a little bit easier to sort of obtain your own business, and that made it easier for you to have a little more financial freedom to a certain degree. So that basically means that you would have people that you would hire, obviously depending on what your funds are and how big your company is, whatever. And by financial freedom is more time for life, more time to live, more time to spend time with family, do the things you love. Obviously, things change financially. Inflation ruined the country, unfortunately, and that made it a lot harder for everyone. People left. But that's the experience that I saw when I lived in Venezuela, and then just moving back here, changing into what Paola mentioned, corporate America. You have to clock in at 9, clock out at 5, keep doing this every day, 30-minute lunch, 30-minute, no more. Bathroom, what, when? So just those little things, obviously, like, we can be extreme about it, but some companies are extreme about it, unfortunately. And we'll touch on this subject later, but work culture is huge when it comes to that and choosing the right job here in America. But that's the biggest difference, really, that I see compared to, geographically, that's another, but from where I've lived.
My experience, I'm Mexican, not Venezuelan. I've never lived in Mexico, but I did have the opportunity to study abroad in Italy. So I can speak a little bit on European work culture and their work-life balance. And I can say, like, the stereotype that they work to live is absolutely true. Like, here I have definitely seen that work is the number one priority. They clock in at 9, they clock out at 5, and then they see if they have time to make plans with other people, with friends, with their hobbies. Whereas in Italian specific culture, they make plans and that's their priority. And then in the back of their mind, they know they have to go to work. So that is something that definitely threw me completely off when I was living there. I remember one of the first few weeks that we were there, I made a couple of friends that were local. And one evening, they just go, Scarlett, fare una passeggiata. And I was like, what are we doing? They just say, we're going to go on a walk. I'm like, okay, where are we walking to? We're just going on a walk. Okay, but to where? Like me in my mind and like this, yeah, what's the destination? And I think that was something that was kind of instilled in my brain in the United States, because we're always, like you were talking a little bit about how we define success, how we define work, how we define all of these things. And that's by being busy and having a destination, which is kind of like stressful. And so we were going on this walk for about 30 minutes. And in my mind, I'm just like, but where are we going? And I was stressed.
The architect in me really wants to add, that is all by design. Like the way that cities are built exactly, at least postmodern cities, which, you know, characterize the US specifically, they are designed for work and going back home. And there really is no design for social activity. So
Crazy.
this whole thing about like, yeah, like where are we going to, like what's the destination, that is literally all by design. And the cities that don't have that in the US are basically like New England cities that, you know, existed before all of this became a thing.
And that is absolutely true. Like you can't own a car in the city center unless you have a special permit and you have to live there, because everything else is public transportation or it's pedestrian friendly. So my friends just invited me on a walk. It turned into a 30-minute walk to like an hour, I think. And it took me, I think, about 4 or 5 passeggiatas to actually, I think, just be calm enough to just go on a walk without having a destination. So I can definitely say that European society, they work to have a life outside of work. Whereas here we kind of have a life because we need to go to work. So I have seen big drastic differences, but kind of shifting over into work culture, I do also want to mention that I have been so blessed to work in a lot of different industries. So I worked as a lifeguard. I've worked in door-to-door sales. I've worked as a dorm receptionist. I currently work for a nonprofit. I also work at a gym. I've worked at a law firm. So just tons of different industries that tend to have different work cultures. Like I did physical therapy for a year. But I do think that I've been really blessed also to find jobs in each industry that have a very relaxed environment. Crazy, right? So me personally, I've never had to deal with like, you have to be there at 9 a.m. on the dot and I have to be out by 5 or stay late because they asked me to, you know? So I think it also has a lot to do with like the mentality of what you're going into, which we mentioned in our little planning session before this. Like, I think I've done this unintentionally, like going into job interviews or seeking out jobs that I know are going to give me the flexibility to prioritize my life over my work. So is that something that you guys have done, or what has your experience been within your own work culture now?
So I work in the health setting, and our main priority is patient care. When it comes to how the employee body is doing, and there's many situations, obviously, like in case like somebody passes, or there's a really sad situation where someone's very sick, or people or someone is struggling with like time, you know, you work so long and you need some time off and this and that. There are certain things that managers point out that, and resources that you can go to. Sometimes they're not enough. But I think just going into any job, any interview, these are very important questions to ask anytime you go into them, because sometimes they'd be like, hey, what questions do you have? You should always have some questions written down for them, because it's very important to clarify these things beforehand.
Unfortunately, architecture has a very chaotic work-life balance. Just gonna put that out there. And I think we have been seeing like a big like generational shift too, of kind of demanding a little bit more like work-life balance from companies. So kind of understanding what that looks like for you. So like for example, like the biggest thing that the biggest shift is like a lot of companies in architecture are salaried employees, and what that does for the employee is that you're basically you're paid by the year, right? Regardless of how many hours you put in. So you're paid based on what would account an hourly rate, assuming that you work 40-hour weeks. But if you work more than 40 hours that week, you're not necessarily paid overtime. And so it kind of becomes up until the discretion of your employer to like let you leave early, like on a Friday, or like things like that. And so like Eladio mentioned, like really going into like interviews prepared with those types of questions. So like a lot of people now are really adamant about hybrid working or like working from home. And I will say not a lot of old school architecture firms aren't really open to that. A lot of firms had a majority of their population say they didn't want to return to the office, and so the company really did kind of like have to shift. And so like kind of really understanding what that means for you. But I will say, like, I can speak to the profession of architecture. If there was this pre-existing mentality that like you needed to eat, live, and breathe like architecture, and like that was your life. And it's another rabbit hole of like why it's a profession that was also really hard for women to get into, because just societal expectations. Once women got to like child rearing age, which it's according to society is as soon as you turn 15. But we digress. But just things like that, like really understanding like what that means for you, like what you want to ask for in a job. And sometimes you might not know right off the bat, and it really does take working somewhere or having different jobs and realizing I like this or I don't like this, because like we've alluded to before, a lot of what we're used to at the beginning is just like school and social life. And regardless of what job you get, it's totally different than when you're in school. So sometimes you just have to try out different things to figure out what you like or what you want to expect out of a job.
I want to add something too. Simply, your time is so valuable, and there are so many opportunities out there regarding what area you work in. And no matter how many like years you've worked somewhere, that is experience to be able to build up your resume and just apply somewhere else and keep searching the right place. Obviously life happens, and you are obligated to be at a certain position for how long. But there are so many companies or workplaces that have such healthy, non-toxic work culture that is so valuable, because like I mentioned earlier, like it just makes things a lot easier. Like if I have a coworker that I love, for example, like I see my friend, I'm like, oh, today's going to be easy. Today's going to be a breeze. I'm just going to crack up a couple jokes. Work is going to be extremely progressive, and I'm going to go home feeling great. And obviously those are relationships you build within. But when you start to see toxic traits, it sucks. It really, really sucks. And I guess human resources are there for a reason, but they don't always solve all these problems. But again, just your time is so valuable. So just looking at all these red flags when it comes to work interviews is very, very important, and just have your list prepared. So
I want to add exactly onto that because I think like 40, 50 years ago, the idea of a positive work life was exactly what corporate America can be, which is clocking in at 9, clocking out at 5. You work at the same company for 20, 30, 50 years until the day you die. And you've made yourself loyal to the company, but that's different from being in like valuable. Like there's a really big difference between loyalty and being irreplaceable. And I do believe that each person has different skills and talents, and they're gonna find a place that they fit in, and that's their strength, and that's where they become irreplaceable. So part of the reason that I have jumped from job to job so often is because if a job doesn't fit into that stage of my life, why am I gonna stay? There are so many jobs, and I know we've been hearing so much about how bad the job market is recently, but like this is a hot take, but dare I say, like that has just not been my experience at all. Like there is always a job out there if you want it and if you're willing to put in the time to find it. It might not be your dream job, but it might be a job where you can have a healthy work-life balance for the time being.
very hot take, but very true.
Very hot take.
There are some little there are some sacrifices that you have to, kind of take in terms of like, I wish I could be very adamant about, my own time. But I know that, for example, I'm not going to change how a firm operates. And, based on the profession that you do choose to go into, like, there is like preconceptions of like previous jobs that you've held and like previous experience and like how relevant is your resume and all these things. And so that is in no way, shape, or form saying like if you like really dislike your job or like the culture is very toxic, like should you stay there? Sometimes I'm just trying to recognize that sometimes based on the profession, there are some little like sacrifices that you have to make. It's just then, okay, what are the tools that what are the things that you can control, right? Like, what are the questions that you can ask during the interview? Like, how do you leverage your network? Like things like that, to kind of counteract, like, for example, like I speak for myself, like, I know in my career, they ask for, architecture related jobs. And if there isn't one, it's like, what does this mean? Like, what is this gap in your resume? And so like, also, this is maybe more technical, but like learning how to tailor previous jobs, like what are the soft skills that you learned there? What are things that you leveraged in that sense? So it is definitely in like knowing what to ask from your employer, and then knowing when is enough for you, I would say.
I use this graph. It's like a pie chart to reflect at the end of every single month, where the circle is divided up into different categories, but then there's circles within the circles, and each category there's like family, friends and romantic relationships, work, education, and I can fill in from 1 to 10 how I think the last month went. And so at the end of every month, I'm able to look at that circle, and it's kind of like a screenshot of what my balance is. So if I am maybe like health-wise not doing so great, but I spent a ton of time with my friends, then I know that the next month, maybe I need to focus a little bit more on like my health, my diet, and working out. So that's one tool that I've absolutely loved. And it's built into my physical planner because, well, yes, I know how my phone works and my calendar works on my phone. I do personally like having written things down because, I mean, it's more impactful that way.
Please share that.
I will. But going into the question of what advice I would give, I would say give yourself grace and give yourself space to be okay in not having work-life balance. Because if you're so hard on yourself and you think that you're failing all the time, it kind of just becomes like this bigger hole that becomes increasingly harder to climb out of. So I would say like rely and count on the relationships and the friendships and the family that you have built around you, but give yourself space to be okay with needing improvement as well. I think that's been really important for me because I know that my work-life balance isn't always great, and dare I say sometimes I could dedicate myself a little bit more to work, but recognizing that changes need to be made and not beating myself up about it is what actually I think gives me the courage to improve it. So that would be my advice. Well, I think that's all we've got for tonight, but thanks guys for joining the Best Life podcast. I do feel like I learned, like even just talking about it, like reflecting on what work-life balance has been for me in the past. It's like having these conversations, and the conversation I had last month with Michaela, it's like, oh, I have learned something, or I am doing okay, or these are the things that I can change and improve. So I hope you guys at least feel a little bit like that too. But that's it. Best Life Podcast.